A darkened battlefield stretched across the ruined earth, once a beacon of civilization now reduced to ashes. The sky churned with black clouds, torn apart by streaks of plasma fire and nuclear detonation aftershocks. The last remnants of humanity stood at the edge of annihilation, their cities turned to wastelands, their fleets burning in orbit, their armies outnumbered 100-1. The Zalari Dominion had come with a singular purpose: to end the human race. A squad of weary soldiers huddled behind the remains of a crumbling skyscraper, their armor battered, their weapons low on energy. Their commander, Captain Elias Vance, surveyed the battlefield with hollow eyes. He had watched planets fall and comrades perish, yet his will remained unbroken. He adjusted his neural link, connecting to the last surviving battle network, scanning for any sign of reinforcement. There was none. Only scattered human strongholds, holding on by sheer defiance. A deep rumble echoed through the broken cityscape as an alien walker, a towering, insect-like war machine, stalked forward, scanning for survivors. Elias signaled his team to stay low, heart pounding as the mechanical behemoth passed mere meters away. The Zalari relied on advanced targeting systems, but their overconfidence was their weakness. Humans had adapted. They had learned how to hide from the machines. A whisper crackled through his earpiece, a signal from another squad. Resistance fighters, still alive in the heart of the wasteland. He patched into the encrypted channel, recognizing the voice of Sergeant Rena Holt. She and a handful of engineers had uncovered something deep beneath the ruins of an old military bunker, something the Zalari had missed. A forgotten relic of humanity's past, locked away in secrecy, waiting for the moment it was needed most. Elias wasted no time. He signaled his squad to move, darting between rubble, avoiding drones scanning the wreckage. Every step was a gamble, every breath a risk, but retreat was not an option. As they reached the entrance of the bunker, Rena greeted them with a grim smile, her eyes gleaming with something Elias hadn't seen in years. Hope. She led them inside, through corridors untouched by time, past rusting consoles and silent machinery. Then, in the heart of the chamber, Elias saw it. A war machine unlike anything the Zalari had encountered. A prototype. A weapon built in desperation during the first invasion but never deployed. Humanity's last creation before surrender became inevitable. The engineers scrambled to bring the dormant giant to life. Ancient systems hummed, energy coursed through forgotten circuits, and for the first time in decades, humanity's might stirred once more. The prototype's armored plating shimmered, adapting to the modern battlefield in real time. Its AI, designed for one purpose, came online with a single directive: destroy the enemy. Outside, the Zalari had detected the power surge. Alarms blared across their networks, commanders barking orders in their guttural language. They mobilized, converging on the bunker, bringing the weight of their war machine down on what they believed was a final act of defiance. Elias clenched his fists. He had fought for years, watched billions perish, and now, for the first time, he saw a real chance. Not survival. Victory. The first explosion rocked the bunker as the Zalari forces arrived. Plasma bolts rained down, melting steel and stone alike. The resistance fighters braced for the inevitable, weapons raised, knowing they were outmatched. But then, the ground trembled. The prototype stepped forward, its eyes blazing with cold fire, its weapons humming with untold power. Elias exhaled, gripping his rifle. This was it. Humanity's final war for survival had begun. The prototype moved with a grace that defied its massive frame. Every step sent vibrations through the shattered ground as its sensors locked onto the incoming Zalari forces. The alien war machines advanced in perfect synchronization, their sleek, insectoid frames bristling with plasma cannons and razor-sharp limbs. The first barrage of energy fire surged forward, scorching everything in its path. But the prototype didn't falter. Its reactive armor absorbed the impact, dispersing the energy like ripples in water. Then, with terrifying precision, it struck back. Twin particle cannons mounted on its shoulders roared to life, unleashing lances of searing light that tore through the enemy lines. Zalari walkers exploded into burning wreckage, their once impenetrable hulls reduced to molten slag. Elias watched in stunned silence. Humanity had built weapons to rival the gods, but they had been too late to deploy them in the First War. Now, with extinction breathing down their necks, this forgotten titan stood between survival and oblivion. Rena worked feverishly at the control station, her fingers dancing over ancient interfaces, bringing more systems online. The prototype wasn't just a machine, it was an adaptive intelligence designed to evolve in real time. As it fought, it learned. Each enemy it destroyed added to its database, refining its strategies, optimizing its responses. But the Zalari weren't fools. The destruction of their first wave sent immediate shockwaves through their command network. Within moments, new units arrived, heavier, deadlier. A Zalari warlord strode onto the battlefield, towering over its soldiers, encased in bioorganic armor that pulsed with a sinister glow. Its 4 arms wielded plasma blades, each one capable of slicing through reinforced steel like paper. The prototype adjusted, shifting its stance. Its outer plating reconfigured, energy levels spiking. It had recognized the new threat and was preparing a response. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. This wasn't just a battle. This was a test. If they failed here, humanity's last hope died with them. The Zalari warlord moved first, closing the distance in a blink. The prototype's cannons fired, but the warlord dodged with inhuman speed, its plasma blades slashing through the air. Sparks erupted as it landed a glancing blow, severing part of the prototype's armor. But the machine did not retreat. Instead, its own weapons adapted, shifting into high-frequency blade emitters that crackled with raw energy. A duel unlike any in history unfolded. The warlord fought with the precision of an apex predator, every strike meant to kill. But the prototype countered, calculating trajectories with ruthless efficiency, parrying each blow with devastating counters. Around them, the battlefield burned. The resistance fighters held their ground as best they could, gunning down Zalari infantry while dodging incoming fire. Rena shouted updates over the comms. The prototype was analyzing the warlord's movements, breaking down its combat algorithms second by second. Then, in a single, decisive moment, the prototype found the flaw. It sidestepped the warlord's next strike, twisted its frame, and drove its energy blade straight through the alien's core. The warlord froze, its body shuddering as energy coursed through it, its 4 arms twitching before falling limp. Then, with a final screech, it collapsed. The battlefield went silent for a brief second. Then the Zalari forces erupted into chaos. Their leader was dead. Their most powerful warrior had fallen not to an armada, not to a fleet, but to a single machine built by the very species they sought to exterminate. Elias felt the shift. The Zalari had never known fear. But now, for the first time, they hesitated. And that was all humanity needed. With renewed determination, the resistance fighters pushed forward, gunning down the retreating Zalari. The prototype stood tall, its systems recalibrating, preparing for the next wave. Because the war was far from over. This victory was just the beginning. The Zalari retreated, their forces scattering into the ruins as their command network struggled to adapt. Elias exhaled sharply, his pulse pounding in his ears. They had won this battle, but it wouldn't take long before the enemy reorganized. The Zalari weren't just a conquering force, they were a machine of war, ruthless and unrelenting. One victory wouldn't stop them. Rena's voice crackled over the comms, her tone urgent. The prototype's energy reserves were running low. Its adaptive algorithms had pushed it to the limit, and without a power source, it wouldn't last another fight. Elias turned toward the engineers, his mind racing. They had uncovered a weapon powerful enough to turn the tide, but if it shut down now, they were back to square one. A deep rumble echoed through the broken cityscape. In the distance, towering Zalari warships descended through the blackened sky, their hulls pulsing with eerie blue light. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Elias clenched his jaw. The Zalari had underestimated humanity once. they wouldn't make that mistake again. Rena worked furiously, bypassing dead circuits, reactivating dormant subsystems. The prototype stood motionless, its eyes dimmed, waiting for power. The engineers struggled to reroute energy, but it wasn't enough. They needed a new source, something strong enough to keep the machine running indefinitely. Then a thought struck Elias. The ruins of old Earth still held remnants of lost technology, forgotten weapons, buried secrets. There were energy cores buried deep within abandoned research facilities, locked away when humanity realized it was losing the war. If they could find one, they might be able to recharge the prototype before the next attack. There was no time to debate. Elias grabbed his rifle and motioned to his squad. They would move fast, strike hard, and retrieve the power source before the Zalari closed in. Rena and the engineers would stay behind, defending the bunker and keeping the prototype on standby. The team moved swiftly through the ruins, dodging patrols, navigating through the skeletal remains of once great cities. The wind howled through shattered buildings, carrying the distant sounds of Zalari forces marching in formation. Every step was a risk. One wrong move and the enemy would descend upon them like predators on wounded prey. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the research facility. The entrance was barely intact, sealed by layers of reinforced steel. But time and war had weakened it. Using explosives, they blasted their way inside, the deafening sound echoing through the wasteland. If the Zalari hadn't noticed them before, they certainly had now. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Dim emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows against the cracked walls. Elias led the way, his weapon raised, scanning for movement. The deeper they ventured, the more the walls bore scorch marks and clawed indentations, evidence of past battles, of something that had tried to break in. Then they found it. In the heart of the facility, resting beneath layers of shattered glass and collapsed support beams, was the energy core. It pulsed with a faint, golden glow, its surface etched with warning symbols from a time long past. It was old, experimental, unstable. But it was their only chance. As the engineers moved to extract it, a deep, guttural growl reverberated through the chamber. Elias froze. This wasn't the sound of a Zalari patrol. This was something else. Then he saw them. From the shadows emerged twisted, grotesque figures, remnants of failed human experiments, their bodies fused with alien biotechnology, their minds lost to madness. The facility hadn't just housed research. It had been a testing ground, a last-ditch effort to create something that could fight the Zalari. And now, those experiments had awoken. The first creature lunged. Elias fired, his rifle rounds tearing into its flesh, but it didn't slow. The others followed, moving with unnatural speed, their limbs shifting, adapting, evolving mid-attack. The squad opened fire, the room erupting into chaos as bullets, plasma, and screams filled the air. The engineers worked frantically, detaching the core from its ancient restraints. The creatures kept coming. Elias shouted orders, his squad falling back, covering the engineers as best they could. One soldier was dragged into the darkness, his scream cut short. Another was ripped apart before Elias could react. Then, with a final hiss, the energy core was free. Elias grabbed it, feeling the heat pulse through his gloves. There was no time to waste. They ran, pushing past the creatures, gunning down anything that moved. The facility trembled, dust raining from the ceiling as the old structure threatened to collapse. As they burst through the entrance, a new horror awaited them. Zalari forces had arrived. An entire legion stood between them and the bunker. Elias glanced at the power core, then at the distant horizon where the prototype waited. There was no way they could fight through this many enemies. But they weren't going to fight. They were going to run. Elias didn't hesitate. He shoved the power core into the arms of his fastest soldier and barked a single command: run. The squad exploded into motion, sprinting through the ruins as plasma bolts rained down around them. The Zalari forces wasted no time, unleashing a relentless barrage that turned the shattered streets into molten craters. A soldier fell, his body disintegrated before he could scream. Another was thrown aside by the shockwave of an explosion. But there was no stopping. The bunker was their only chance, the prototype their only hope. Elias fired blindly as he ran, his rifle overheating as he tried to slow the enemy pursuit. The Zalari weren't just attacking, they were hunting. The air filled with the unearthly howls of war beasts, biomechanical monstrosities bred for speed and slaughter. They leaped from the ruins, closing in with terrifying efficiency. The fastest soldier carrying the power core stumbled. Elias saw it happen in slow motion, the sudden lurch, the core slipping from his grasp. Then, before it could hit the ground, another soldier snatched it mid-stride, never breaking momentum. The hesitation cost them another life as a Zalari war beast tackled the fallen man, tearing him apart in seconds. The bunker was close. Just beyond the last stretch of ruins. But the Zalari weren't slowing. More war beasts surged forward, their razor-clawed limbs shredding through concrete and steel. Elias saw the bunker doors in the distance, Rena and the engineers waving frantically, ready to activate the defenses. A war beast lunged. Elias spun, his rifle empty. He grabbed his combat knife, slashing as the creature slammed into him. The impact drove the air from his lungs. He fought against the overwhelming strength, stabbing wildly. Then, just as its jaws closed around his throat, a plasma blast tore through its skull. Rena stood at the bunker entrance, rifle smoking. "Move," she shouted. The last of the squad surged forward. The soldier carrying the core dove through the entrance, rolling to his feet as Rena slammed the emergency lockdown. The massive doors groaned as they sealed shut, thick reinforced plating hissing into place. Outside, the Zalari forces screeched in frustration, hammering against the bunker with relentless force. But for now, they were safe. Elias staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. Their squad was reduced to half. Blood pooled on the floor, the wounded groaning in pain. But they had made it. Rena didn't waste time. She grabbed the power core and sprinted toward the prototype. The engineers worked in tandem, slotting the core into place. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was deathly silent, save for the distant pounding of Zalari weapons against the bunker walls. Then the prototype's eyes ignited. Energy surged through its frame, its systems roaring back to life. The adaptive plating shimmered, adjusting to the new power source. It stood taller, stronger, faster. The ancient weapon was no longer a relic of a lost war. It was something new. And the Zalari were about to learn what that meant. The bunker trembled as the enemy outside deployed their heaviest artillery. The doors wouldn't hold much longer. Elias knew there was only one choice. They had to take the fight to the Zalari. The prototype turned toward the bunker doors, its cannons charging. Then, with a single, earth-shaking blast, it blew them wide open. The explosion tore through the bunker entrance, sending molten debris and Zalari soldiers flying in all directions. Smoke and fire filled the air as the prototype stepped forward, its towering frame illuminated by the burning ruins. The battlefield went silent for a fraction of a second as the Zalari processed what had just happened. Then chaos erupted. The enemy forces opened fire, plasma bolts streaking toward the machine in a blinding barrage. But this time, the prototype was ready. Its reactive armor absorbed the impact, recalibrating in real time. Its shoulder cannons roared, sending arcs of white-hot energy that vaporized entire squads of Zalari in an instant. Elias and the remaining resistance fighters surged forward, weapons raised. The fear that had gripped them for years was gone. They had something the Zalari had never expected, an answer to their dominance. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. The Zalari commander barked orders in its guttural language, directing its forces to overwhelm the prototype with sheer numbers. War beasts charged from the flanks, leaping onto the machine's armor, clawing and biting, trying to find weak points. The prototype adapted instantly. Its outer plating pulsed, releasing an electromagnetic surge that sent the creatures screaming as they were torn apart midair. Then the Zalari unleashed their heavy artillery. A colossal siege walker, towering even over the prototype, emerged from the smoke. Its biomechanical limbs twitched as it locked onto its target, the energy cannon mounted on its back glowing with an ominous hum. The prototype analyzed the threat, recalibrating its attack patterns. The siege walker fired. A pulse of pure destruction erupted from its cannon, ripping through buildings and melting the ground beneath it. But the prototype moved faster than anything of its size should have been capable of. It sidestepped, the beam missing by mere inches, then retaliated. Its right arm shifted, morphing into an energy lance, and in one fluid motion, it lunged. The lance struck deep into the siege walker's core. The alien war machine screeched, its body convulsing as the energy spread, corrupting its systems from the inside. Then, with a deafening roar, it detonated in a cataclysmic explosion, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Zalari hesitated. Their war machines were failing. Their tactics were useless. The invincible force that had conquered entire civilizations was losing to a species they had deemed inferior. Elias saw the hesitation and knew this was their moment. "Push forward," he shouted. The resistance fighters stormed through the battlefield, taking down retreating Zalari forces one by one. The prototype advanced alongside them, cutting through the enemy like a force of nature. Then, something unexpected happened. The Zalari ships in orbit began to move. Their fleet, which had remained a constant shadow over the ruins of Earth, was repositioning. Retreating. Elias narrowed his eyes. The Zalari didn't retreat. Not unless they had something worse planned. A deep tremor ran through the ground. The sky darkened as something massive began descending from orbit. Not a ship. Something bigger. The Zalari had just raised the stakes. And humanity's final battle was only beginning. The sky split open as an enormous structure descended from orbit. It wasn't just a warship. It was a planetary siege platform, a mobile fortress the size of a city, its underside bristling with weapon arrays powerful enough to crack continents. The Zalari had abandoned any pretense of conventional warfare. They were done fighting. They were going to wipe Earth clean in one final act of extermination. Elias felt the rumble beneath his boots as the Zalari ground forces fell back, retreating toward the incoming behemoth. They weren't running in fear. They were regrouping, preparing for the final assault. Whatever was coming next would make every battle before this look insignificant. The prototype sensors flared, analyzing the siege platform's descent trajectory. It calculated the worst possible outcome in seconds. Once fully deployed, the fortress would unleash a planetary cleansing pulse, an energy wave designed to incinerate all organic life. The Zalari had used this weapon on countless worlds. Now it was Earth's turn. Rena's voice came over the comms, barely controlled panic in her tone. The prototype systems had accessed old war archives, classified files buried deep in military black sites. There was only one way to stop a planetary cleansing pulse. They had to destroy the siege platform before it completed its charge cycle. Elias gritted his teeth. That meant taking the fight off-world. The prototype's chest opened, revealing a cockpit-like chamber within its core. This wasn't just a war machine. It was a piloted weapon, a fusion of man and machine, built for a battle humanity never got to fight. Elias stepped forward. "No," Rena snapped, grabbing his arm. "If you go up there, you're not coming back." Elias met her gaze. There was no time for doubt. No time for hesitation. He had spent years watching humanity lose. That ended now. Without another word, he climbed inside. The chamber sealed around him, neural links activating, connecting his mind to the machine. A surge of data flooded his brain, combat algorithms, tactical calculations, enemy movement patterns. He wasn't just piloting the prototype. He was becoming it. The ground trembled as the machine crouched, energy thrusters building power. Then, in a single, earth-shaking leap, it launched skyward, leaving the battlefield behind. As it broke through the atmosphere, the siege platform loomed ahead, its weapons already priming for planetary destruction. Zalari fighters swarmed around it, moving like a hive, protecting their final weapon. But Elias wasn't alone. The prototype's AI synchronized with every system, enhancing his reflexes beyond human limits. He dodged plasma fire, weaving through the chaos, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. Then he reached the platform. The prototype slammed into the fortress, carving through its hull like a meteor. The interior was a labyrinth of alien corridors, pulsing with biomechanical energy. Zalari warriors flooded the passages, but Elias didn't stop. He tore through them, his machine an unstoppable force of destruction. He followed the power signatures, deeper and deeper, until he found it. The core. A massive pulsating reactor, its energy building to catastrophic levels. The countdown had already begun. If it reached full charge, Earth would be reduced to nothing but ash. Elias didn't hesitate. He activated the prototype's final override sequence. The machine's adaptive plating began to destabilize, its systems shifting, its energy levels spiking past critical. The AI had calculated the only possible outcome. The only way to stop the Zalari's ultimate weapon. A controlled detonation. The prototype would self-destruct, using its energy reserves to trigger a chain reaction that would rip through the siege platform's core, destroying it from within. Elias exhaled, gripping the controls. There was no escape. No miracle waiting on the other side. He had known the cost from the moment he stepped inside. He closed his eyes. And activated the sequence. A blinding light consumed everything. The explosion rippled through the siege platform, igniting its core in a chain reaction of unstoppable destruction. The colossal structure buckled, its biomechanical limbs writhing as fire and plasma tore through its body. The Zalari forces still inside barely had time to react before they were vaporized. The fortress, the ultimate symbol of their domination, was collapsing. On the surface, the resistance fighters shielded their eyes as a second sun ignited in the sky. The shockwave spread outward, shattering the clouds, lighting up the ruins below. Rena watched, breathless, her mind refusing to accept what had just happened. The prototype, the only weapon that had given humanity a fighting chance, was gone. And with it, so was Elias. The Zalari fleet faltered. Their planetary cleansing weapon was destroyed. Their ground forces, already demoralized, had lost their final advantage. The aliens, for the first time in history, were experiencing something they had never known. Fear. And then, something incredible happened. Their ships began to retreat. The mighty war fleet that had once darkened Earth's sky now fled, their formations breaking apart, their engines burning hot as they accelerated away. The Zalari had never encountered true resistance before. They had never lost. But now, they had. And whatever remained of their empire wasn't willing to risk a second defeat. The battlefield fell silent. Rena dropped to her knees, exhaustion and grief washing over her. Around her, the resistance fighters stared upward, their weapons lowering, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. The war that had defined their existence for so long was over. But victory came at a cost. Days passed. The remaining Zalari forces on the ground were hunted down or captured. The ruined cities of Earth, once drowning in despair, now echoed with the sounds of rebuilding. Humanity had won, but they had paid for it with the lives of countless heroes. And one in particular. Rena stood on a barren hill, overlooking what had once been a battlefield. She placed her hand on the twisted remains of the prototype's outer shell, the only piece that had survived re-entry. The machine, like Elias, was gone. But the war had ended because of him. A gust of wind carried dust across the wasteland. Rena closed her eyes, listening to the silence. Then, faintly, something flickered within the wreckage. A dim, almost imperceptible pulse of light. Her breath caught in her throat. The prototype had been designed to adapt. To evolve. To survive. And if even a part of it had endured, then maybe, just maybe, Elias had too.